Hey guys, and welcome to the very first video of Booked with the Cook. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make a fluffy, delicious sandwich bread. No special tools required. Since I am making this for breakfast, I'm starting out the morning with a cup of coffee and my bookworm mug while wearing my Ninjas in a Library t-shirt. Just in case you were wondering, I am a librarian and subtlety is not my thing. This is a very simple bread recipe with only 6 ingredients. Now, without further ado, let's get cooking. First, you'll need 3 cups of bread flour or all-purpose flour. Either of these will work fine for this recipe. Just make sure you don't get them confused with self-raising flour. This is not the kind of flour you want to use for this particular recipe. It already has baking powder mixed in with it, and it will just end in disaster, trust me. Next, you'll need 1/4 cup of vegetable oil and 1 teaspoon of salt, shown here in my adorable little salt pig. 1 cup of hot tap water. You don't want this to be hot enough to burn your skin. You do want it to be comfortably warm. And put a pin in that and you'll see why in a minute. Next, 1 tablespoon of sugar. Now, my original recipe actually called for 3 tablespoons of sugar, and while trying to dial back the amount of sugar in my diet, I realized that 3 tablespoons was completely unnecessary for this recipe, so I've actually just started using 1 tablespoon as a result. And last, but certainly not least, we have active dry yeast. Now, this stuff is rather interesting because, being yeast, it is actually alive. It's really a member of the fungus family. However, active might be a bit presumptuous for this stuff because we're gonna need to give it a little wake-up call. Now that we have assembled our ingredient Avengers, go ahead and take your teaspoon of salt and blend it in with your flour. Now, I see you eyeing this vegetable oil here, but don't add it yet. You'll wind up with oily pockets in your dough, and you don't want that. Just let it wait in the wings for just a little bit longer, and let's address blooming our yeast. Blend your tablespoon of sugar with your cup of warm water until all of the sugar crystals have dissolved. This creates the perfect environment for your yeast to get its groove on. Now, I like to gently sprinkle the yeast granules so as many as possible are in contact with the water to give each of our little bubble-producing buddies here what they need to make our bread awesome. Just let these guys party it up for about 15 minutes until it starts looking a bit on the fluffy side. After your 15 are up, you'll notice the byproducts of the yeast sugary feast, carbon dioxide bubbles, which is what is going to make our bread light and fluffy. Fun fact, yeast is called a leavening agent, which is derived from the Latin word levare, which means to lift, making this humble little fungus the heavyweight champion in the baking world for centuries. Okay guys, the moment you've been waiting for, go ahead and add that vegetable oil and our yeast, now fully awake and ready to get to work. Try to scrape it out as best you can, but if you don't have a rubber spatula like the one I have, don't sweat it. Now go ahead and begin to incorporate your ingredients. It'll start off looking kind of funky, but it'll all come together. And hey, if it's dry like this, don't sweat that either. Bread may look complicated, but it's surprisingly forgiving. Speaking of which, be right back, hang on just a second. Okay, now we're back with a bit more water and better hydrated dough. If your mixture winds up being a bit too dry, just sprinkle some water in there and continue mixing. And don't worry about it getting too wet either. Just mix in a bit of flour to dry it out. Once your mixture has turned into a tacky, somewhat sticky dough, let it sit for about 30 to 40-ish minutes. This period is called autolyse. This isn't a rise, but rather it's a rest. It allows the flour to fully absorb your water and makes it a lot easier to work with. After that resting time is up, go ahead and turn your dough out onto a well-floured work surface and begin the kneading process. To start kneading, stretch your dough and then fold it back onto itself, kind of like an envelope. Then push forward on the seam with the heel of your hand. Just keep doing that folding and pushing motion until it starts to feel soft and supple, and then keep going. It'll start off being pretty tough to work with, especially if you're a wimp like I am, but you'll notice that the longer you work with it, the softer it will get. This is the gluten beginning to develop in your mixture. Now, most cookbooks and websites that deal with bread making will say to knead it for about 7 to 8 minutes, but again, I'm a massive wimp, so I worked at it for about 10 minutes, and don't worry about over kneading your dough. It is impossible to do that if you're kneading it by hand. When you're done, the dough should be soft and smooth, but not sticky. However, to see if it's really ready, take a bit of dough and stretch it. If you can stretch it thin enough for light to pass through without breaking, your dough is ready. This is called the window pane test. Next, go ahead and take some vegetable oil and, using a paper towel, generously apply that to a decently large bowl. And plop your dough ball right on in. Cover that in plastic wrap and let rise for about 30 to 45 minutes or until doubled in size. Once your first rise is finished, take out your frustrations by punching down the dough, in my case literally. Bread making is an extremely cathartic pastime. Once your dough has been thoroughly squished, turn it back out onto your, say it with me now, well-floured work surface. Using a rolling pin like the one I just awkwardly showed off because I am way prouder of owning a French-style rolling pin than I really should be, try to form your dough into a vaguely rectangular shape. Don't worry about it being perfect. And boom! Movie magic. Once your theoretical quadrilateral has been achieved, go ahead and roll this little guy up like a scroll. I swear I did not mean for that to rhyme, guys. Pinch the seams together and tuck the ends under so you wind up with a little dough log, like this. Now trundle your little dough bundle into a well-greased bread loaf pan and make sure that the seam from where you rolled it is on the bottom side. Sprinkle a touch of flour on the top of your loaf to prevent your preferred cover from sticking, and score the top of the loaf with a sharp knife. This will actually help your bread to rise in the oven, and has the added bonus of giving us that classic sandwich bread shape. Cover your lovely loaf with a clean, damp tea towel and let rise for about 20 to 30 minutes, or again, doubled in size, and preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Once your bread has finished its final rise, pop it into your now preheated oven for about 30 to 35 minutes until golden brown. One of the ways that I know that my bread is completely done is when it starts smelling really good. And just like that, ladies and gents, our bread has been baked. Looks good, doesn't it? Now, while it's still hot, carefully take it out of the bread pan and put it onto a wire rack to cool. Fun fact, back when I was in college and didn't have a wire rack, I jerry-rigged one by laying chopsticks across a deep plate that I had, and it worked out just as well. Now, do not cut into this bread when it's fresh out of the oven, as tempting as that might be. You need to let it rest for at least an hour or until it's completely cooled. Now that your bread has finally cooled down, feel free to dig right in. Now, if you don't have a big bread knife like the one you see here, don't worry. You can actually just use any serrated knife and it should work just fine. But if you've been patient, which I'm sure you have, you will be rewarded with fluffy, moist sandwich bread so good you'll even want to eat the end pieces. Okay guys, that about wraps it up. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video and let me know if you have any questions in the comment section down below. And I'll see you guys next time on Booked with the Cook.